It's such a nasty film, and what I mean by that is very gooey. Um,
That's a great
it
way of putting it.
it gives me it reminds me of like things like The Fly and Gremlins and Aliens in terms of like the practical um, effects. So I'm curious, like, what in terms of that, what did you pull from?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Paul and I really concentrate a lot of our energy on building the characters and the psychology of the characters and all that. And so when the idea was first when Paulo first brought the idea, I think at that time, like, just working title, I think it was called Giant Cockroach. And I sort of just went like, whoa, like, that's not, we're gonna do a creature feature. Like, just by the title alone, I was like, this is kind of a strange idea for us.
Yeah.
But, I think without losing that idea that it was all about the psychology of the characters, we needed to make, if it's going to be called Cockroach, it also needs to have a bit of that, the thing, and, it has to have that element of the creature feature, even if it is about the psychology of these characters, it still has to go to that place that the title indicates, right?
Mhm.
So that's sort of where we were, where did we pull from? Yeah, the body horror, definitely. Cronenberg is a huge thing for us. Um, but,
Possession, Zulawski's Possession,
Zulawski's
Okay.
Possession for sure, which
big influence
really,
for us.
really, balances those two things. I don't know if balance is a good thing with Zulawski anyhow, but which definitely explores those two things. So yeah, we were thinking about how the psychology of the character can also be the creature feature and how that can develop.
I love that you pick the cockroach because I feel like it's one of those creatures that most people are disgusted by, or at least they're afraid of in some way. Did you ever toy with like maybe a spider instead of being that vehicle?
If, yeah, well, the genesis of the project when I brought the concept to Dan, it was always a cockroach because I was drawing from personal experience. I'm now based in Toronto, and Dan's in Montreal, but for a time I was living in Los Angeles, and with my wife, and we recently had a little baby, and that was kind of the inspiration of the film because in hot climates such as Los Angeles, there are cockroaches, and my wife is absolutely petrified. To this day, I can't even utter the word. It triggers something um, very traumatic in her, and so I'm like, I know what I'll do. I'll write a movie about that, and because that's it. It harkens on something very visceral for us and um, very personal. And so it was like that, and then just dealing with being new parents and the unknown of it, and trying to maintain this image of being, because you want to get it right. And now, especially with social media, there's this veneer and this illusion, and but what's behind that is, I think a lot of people are dealing with a lot emotionally. Just the overwhelm and postpartum and things like that. And there's this stigma about, like, if you're struggling, then that you're labeled a bad parent, and or you've failed your child, which is the worst feeling that anyone could have. So all that said, I want to combine that kind of psychological element with the disgust of a cockroach. So we have the physical cockroaches, but metaphorically speaking, that was kind of our approach to the film.
So did you and your wife deal with postpartum, or did you have like emotional hurdles that you had to get over?
Yes, very much. The film is about a woman dealing with postpartum, but and the depression and anxiety. There's so many difficult emotions, the shame, the guilt,
Mhm.
um, and whilst you're doing that, you have this beautiful miracle, and then that you love and you're trying to care for, and it chips away at you, and it doesn't make you a bad person to have these feelings. If anything, like we're human, and so it really, it was very difficult. And also there's a scene in the film where the husband is bouncing on the yoga ball, and that's a very much a real thing that I had to do for hours on end, because there's our daughter was colicky, and that is something very strange. I don't even think doctors understand quite what they say. Well, it's gas. The baby's got gas. It is. I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. It's like this mysterious thing, and it's very strange in that when the sun sets, they call it witching hour. So pretty much every day, like clockwork, your child will just start wailing uncontrollably for hours on end, and the only way to soothe them is to, for us anyways, there's a lot of white noise and bouncing on a yoga ball. So we put that in the film because I went through it. Um,
And
and yeah,
all these things that Paulo was bringing up, and as we were discussing this idea, for me, sound wise, I was just like, I mean, this could be, a dark screen with just all of these sounds developing, without even having any images.
yeah,
And they all seemed very terrifying to me, because, when you're in a place of darkness and trying to figure out how to best solve these issues with your child, with your family. You are in a place of darkness where all these sounds are just new to you, right? So I felt like that was a really good place for us to sort of start also.
Speaking of the sound, I love the creepy crawly noises that you hear in the walls. That's really effective.
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
So that was, yeah, we really wanted to bring that idea not only to the post sound and all that, but we wanted to bring it to set. So we did a lot of pre-recording stuff, and so we actually played these things during the filming, so that we could get the actors to sort of feel exactly what we were trying to get across.
Did you Was this always written as a short, or did you toy with like expanding it to be a feature?
It was always written to be a short. It was meant to be our follow-up to Bloodshed, our first one, and we had, a lot of the same people involved. Um, it was it was slightly expanded. We had it a little bit longer. I think, at one point, Paulo, what we were looking at, like maybe 15 pages or something like that.
right, yeah, and it's just you know the reality of independent filmmakers is we only had certain amount of days, so we had to streamline everything. And there's those practical things you think of with film festivals as well, with run times, right? If you, as a short, you want to keep it contained, and it was always meant to be a standalone and live as a short film. And but now that we've seen the final piece, is it's not outside you know the realm of possibilities that we would take it and expand it. For us, because speaking of all, the gooiness and the terror and the postpartum and all those things, like ultimately we want, we would hope that the film is in a way like cathartic, because it just tells you that all we really have at the end of the day is love and human connection. So that was something that we hope is people take away from it. And I just want to say about the sound design. That's the other thing, is as indie filmmakers, your budgets are very, very small, but whatever limitations we may have, we see that as an opportunity. So that's why the sound work for us when we write is always a huge part of it. We don't think of it as after the fact. It's always entrenched in the development of the film. We're always thinking of the sound, because we don't necessarily have VFX, huge VFX and practical effects budgets, but it forces us to think outside the box, and that's where the sound work came in.
Now, Daniel, you mentioned earlier like The Thing. So I'm kind of curious, both of your experiences with horror, what were your gateways into the genre?
Oh, that is such a good question. I mean, I think, like the first thing that I saw as a kid was um American Werewolf in London, and that really just completely pulled me in at a really young age as to, wow, this genre can be so many things, because that film starts as a comedy. It starts, there's a lot of comedy involved in the film, but you know, it's it's a comedy. It's a dark psychological film about, transformation and all this. It's an erotic film at some moments. It's just like it just has so many things that, and I was like, wow, like, it really opened my eyes. And then I think from there, obviously, just, a normal sort of upbringing in it, but, to Texas Chainsaw, which is, still one of the movies that, I talk about nonstop, probably bore everyone to death. But, I mean, there's so many movies like that, and then, you branch off into all the other like subgenres and stuff. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I follow. I mean, there's
Well,
so
no,
many.
well, I don't know if Daniel mentioned it earlier, but we've known each other since we were 9 years old, and we very small town in Quebec, up in Canada, and we played soccer together. And then being in a small town, there's very little to do, so there's the video store, and that's where we kind of like our love of not just horror, and I think of film. Uh, that's where it came at a very young age. Like, so when we were teenagers, we were just like spent countless nights just renting three or four maybe films and just watching, like you mentioned, Texas Chainsaw Massacres, all the slasher films, of course, the Wes Cravens and the John Carpenters, but we were also watching things like,
Peter
you know,
Greenaway.
Peter Greenaway's The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover. We were watching Kurosawa. We were watching Wim Wenders. Like, we were just like absorbing all these things, and that's where I think our love of like character driven storytelling comes from, is just and understanding that that film really is cinema is limitless. And so we're trying to take those influences and those sensibilities and bring them into our horror films.
Well, growing up, I know like a lot of filmmakers played with video cameras and filming different things growing up. Was that something that you two did?
I mean, strangely, no. Like a lot of our friends did, and had sort of like little movie, like independent movie projects going on around. Um, For me, no. I mean, I was always involved on kind of a musical side of things. So, I was spending countless hours trying to learn how to play guitar at that age,
Well, you did pretty
while
well, Dan. Like, you did pretty well
while
at that.
while a lot of my friends were making films around. But so I was always aware of it, but it wasn't something that I had even imagined at a younger age, like doing that. I didn't really see it as kind of a possibility until much later. Paulo?
Well, so Daniel mentioned that, so he was focused on music a lot, and we did have a friend that had, and this is 25, 30 years ago. He had the big video cameras and the editing, like the non-linear editing equipment, and we'd be invited to participate in like these sketches and stuff. So that was our earliest introduction. And then we Daniel went off to Montreal. I went to Toronto and to study acting. So that's kind of my background. I started as an actor and then got into screenwriting and now into directing. And so Daniel and I kind of found each other again a little later in life, and we had this huge love of anything horror, and so we decided, better late than never, and just to jump in, and that's how our first short came together, Bloodshed, which also played at Panic Fest in 2021, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your film being a character-driven piece, Beth is an interesting character because there's a moment when her husband suggests the apartment getting fumigated, um,
Mhm.
which can be like, as an audience member, you're like, come on, that would solve all your problems. But then you think, the more you think about it, you think it's a horrifying situation. And then dealing with depression, you're not thinking logically about these things. So,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, it's amazing how exactly overwhelm can just completely cloud one's judgment. Sleep deprivation is
yeah,
also a huge, huge part of it. You're just not thinking straight. And also, yeah, again, with the internet, like Google MD, you just anything that's happening, you get all the book, you read all the books, you go online, you Google, you search, you see these horrible things. You're like, oh, and you don't know what to do. You're just completely at a loss. And then you're just unraveling. And so that's what we were trying to capture because yeah, they could have. And then she mentions, oh, why don't we just ask your mom for help or your sister, or let's just go away for a while and just, which, that would have, the movie would have only been 5 seconds, it just,
And
they would, and they fumigate the house at the end, they come back, everything's fine. But
and I'm glad you bring it up, B, because it's also one of those things in slasher movies, right, where we're always like, "Don't do that," you know. It's
yeah,
like, "Don't go there, stop, no, don't open that door," whatever. And in this case, it's kind of that. It's like, "Oh, just get it done," and let's have this, let's end this right now. But it's kind of it's exciting as horror filmmakers to have the audience sort of go, "Oh, please."
yeah. It's funny that
yeah,
you bring up WebMD. It's like the idea of like you'd rather go online and look up your symptoms rather than like go to the doctor.
that's right. Heaven forbid, right? It's
Yeah,
go see a specialist. But that's it. I don't know if I call it like stigma is the best, but embarrassment of just looking stupid again, of looking like a failure. And if only we just acknowledged, if like, we're all, that's the secret, right? That's the worst kept secret is like no one knows what they're doing. Our parents didn't know what they were doing either, and you're just flying by the seat of your pants. You're just trying to figure it out. And if we just took a breath and went and talk and go, I'm messed up right now. I'm going through something, very hard right now. I think we'd be surprised that something, that people would open up and go, yeah, me too, right? Um, if only. So
it's interesting that you bring up parents. Looking at my own family, it was like my parents didn't like going to the doctor, and my grandparents didn't like going to the doctor. I always found that it's like older generations have this thing where they don't want to get help, but then they like wait until it gets really, really bad, and then they'll go to the doctor. So it's
uh,
interesting to look at that.
yeah, because we were just afraid. I guess we're just deep down they'll never admit this. My dad was stubborn too and just never went to the doctor and just yeah, we're afraid of
Yeah.
what's on the other side, right? So that's something definitely like that's a good nerve, to to tap here. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, like, what is had been the hardest lesson that you've had to learn being a parent?
Wow. Um, I think it's just again with the film that with the genesis of the film, the inspiration for the film, it was just it's okay not to know and just to do your best and just I tell every new parent this, just love the shit out of your kid. I mean, just love your, that's all. If you do that, you'll be okay. Just see them for who they are and love them and nurture them, and the rest will fall into place.
Now, just to kind of wrap up here, we talked earlier about like the like waiting for the reception of this film.
Mhm.
Being an indie filmmaker, how do you like process like reviews, but like negative reception to a film, like to Bloodshed, for example?
I mean, the part of the excitement is having people see it in general, right? I mean, you've already you've already passed the threshold of having people see your film, which is, the aim and the goal. And if people aren't appreciating it or taking it or seeing what put into it, or the ideas that are there, that's okay. That's totally fine. I mean, everyone gets to process that information the way that they want to do it. We always, when we're making these films, we hope that people will appreciate them, but that's because we're putting into it all of our appreciation and what we want to see on film. So if people don't register, or don't have the intended sort of reception to it, that's okay. It's yeah, I'm glad they saw it, and I'm glad that they're expressing themselves in terms of having seen it and giving us feedback about it.
Absolutely, and the films can be art is subjective, and it's polar. It can be polarizing, and if everyone liked everything you did, I think that's actually more problematic as an artist. You're like, because you're just down the middle trying. At the end of the day, we love making films. We love horror films, and we want to make something that we would want to see, and it's something that you can have all the gore and all the blood, and you can throw all that stuff at the screen, but if it doesn't, trigger something, within you, something, visceral, and it doesn't try and speak a truth, then, it's, I think we've not done our job. So, if people have a reaction either way, at least we've know that we've done our best.
And when we're assembling our team to put these films together, their reaction is very important to us as well, right? So when someone reads it and goes, "Yes, I want to be part of this," like, Hayden Baptiste, who's been with us on the last two, like, he's, helped us. He's such a strategic producer. Like, he knows where to go, where to get crew, where to, help us out in all these little ways. And, we've been working with the same cinematographer, Christian Beals, who's done the last two with us as well. Like, you know, when these really important pillars sort of read our material and go, "I want to be part of that," we've already won, you know? So bringing that to audiences is another bonus.
I always say that, especially in horror, a film is better to take big swings than it is to uh, play it safe, be like middle of the road, mediocre. Because at least you get reaction from it rather than being like, oh, it's fine, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. It's you've diluted it, right? I mean, go big or go home, and do something that again that's so specific to you. I think I don't remember who said this, but it's like the more specific you are, the more universal your message becomes because everyone goes, but everyone can respond to it in their own way, and that's what we tried to do here. And Dan mentioned our Daniel mentioned our crew, and in we shot this in Ottawa, and a lot of the films that shoot in Ottawa are like Christmas movies or like Hallmark feel good films. So a lot of the crew spend most of their days working on those types of projects. So when they got this, which I would say is like the antithesis of
Yeah.
of those films, they all jumped at it. They're like such a breath of fresh air to enter this dark macabre world, and so they're like, Hayden, name the time, name the place, and we will be there. So they definitely had a good time kind of letting their crazy side out.
I speak with a lot of like musicians and songwriters, and they always say like when they release an album, it's no longer theirs. It becomes the world's. Would you say that's true about making a film too?
Yeah, I mean, you have no choice at some point but to let it go, right? And that, I think that's hard. And it took us a long time to get this movie done, just because we shot it in like early in the year, and then just based on people's schedules and our financing and stuff. So it took us a long time to get it done. And you do want to hold on to it, and there is a bit of a fear to letting it go. But I agree with that. I think that that's the best way to do it. You have to get it out. It's your duty once you've done that much work on it to allow it to go out and have its own path in the world, just much like parenting, right,
Like
Paolo?
you got to cut the umbilical cord.
There you go.
There,
Yeah.
we came full circle there. There it is.
Yeah.
It's such